On today's video, we'll be showing you how to install a RaceChip on the Mercedes-Benz 4-liter V8. Before installing the RaceChip, please wait until your engine is cool enough to work on. Put your parking brake or emergency brake on. If your vehicle is equipped with an alarm system, please disable it. Pop the hood, roll up the windows, close the doors, and press the lock button on your key fob and move that key fob 30 feet away. You're gonna wait about 10 minutes after for all the electricity to clear from underneath the hood. Now that the engine is cool enough to work on, the first step is to remove the plastic engine cover. Simply gonna pull up from the four corners. It's gonna be very gentle, it is plastic. There's gonna be a grommet in either corner. Once we get that, we'll set the engine cover aside. Second step is to remove the 4 torx screws holding the air cleaner on. We're using a T25 Torx to remove these 4 screws. Next step on the installation is to remove the 2 locking pins here. Now you can use the body removal tool or you can use a small flathead screwdriver. Now we're going to remove the 2 rubber snorkels. First thing we're going to do is lift up to break these free from the air cleaners. Now there'll be a small locking plastic tab here and right underneath here. We're going to use our same body removal tool to pop this one like that and then slide back to get the locking tab off and you can remove everything. Next up is to remove the 2 sensor plugs on the air box and the blow-off valve. To do so, we're going to pull back on the locking tab, press down, and then gently pull back on the sensor plug. Now we'll do the same thing on the other side as well. With the 2 sensors unplugged on the passenger side, we're not going to move to the driver's side and do the same 2 sensors here. Remember, pull back on the locking tab and then press down to remove the sensor. Same thing on both of these. And then we're going to loosen up the clamp right here on the hose using a small flathead screwdriver. We're just going to lift up and gently work the screwdriver in there until the clamp releases itself, just like that. So before we loosen the 2 hose clamps holding the air filters in place, we first need to remove the hose clamp here and take the hose off the turbo itself on both sides. So to do so, we're going to use a pair of pliers or channel locks, squeeze that together, and gently pull that off, and then you can remove the hose, and do so on the other side as well. The next step is to loosen the 2 hose clamps holding the air filters in place. Now it's important we're doing the 2 hose clamps on the air filter, not the ones that go to the turbo themselves. So we're going to use a 7mm socket or a flathead screwdriver to loosen the hose clamps. Next will be to remove the air cleaners. There's going to be a couple grommets we're simply going to pick up and pull away. Being very gentle here. Set that aside. And then we'll do the same thing to the driver's side as well. For the 4-liter V8, our A connection is going to go to the boost pressure sensor down here. Our B is going to go to the manifold pressure sensor down here. And our C is going to go to our camshaft position sensor right here. Now you'll also have an A and B on the driver's side right here and on the manifold along the side of the motor right there. To access the A and B sensors on the passenger side, we're going to move the coolant reservoir off to the side. We're going to push the 2 locking tabs in and just kind of bend it out of the side, not to kink any of the hose lines. We'll start by removing the OEM sensor plug, passenger side. You see there's a gray locking tab back here on the back, so we'll want to pull that back and then press down to release the OEM sensor. Next, we'll take the female end of the RaceChip Connect wiring harness and plug it into the boost pressure sensor, the OEM boost pressure sensor. Push that in until it locks, and push the gray locking tab until it clicks into place. Next, we'll plug in the male connection of the RaceChip wiring harness back into the OEM sensor. Now we'll do the A connection on the driver's side, also to the boost pressure sensor. Same thing, there'll be the gray locking tab on there. So after we've unplugged the OEM sensor plug, we'll then take the RaceChip wiring harness, plug it in, lock it in place with the gray locking tab, and then take our male end of our RaceChip harness and go back onto that OEM sensor. Next we'll be doing the B connection to the manifold pressure sensor. On the driver's side, it'll be just along the side here. Again, same gray locking tab as the boost pressure sensor. Once the sensor's been unplugged, we'll take the female end of the RaceChip supplied wiring harness, push it in until it clicks, and then lock it in place with the gray locking tab. Then we'll take the male end of the harness and we'll plug that directly back into the OEM sensor. Next up is the B connection going to the manifold pressure sensor on the passenger side. I'm going to go ahead and unplug the OEM sensor. And again, it's going to be behind the coolant reservoir, just down here. Then we'll take the female end of the supplied RaceChip wiring harness and plug that directly in. And then we'll take the male end of the RaceChip harness and plug it directly back into the OEM sensor. And the last connection to be made is to the C connection, going to the camshaft position sensor. Using a little 90-degree pick to get this one off, pull back on the locking tab, and then press down. And then we'll take the female end of the RaceChip supplied wiring harness and plug it into the OEM sensor plug. And we'll take the male connection for the C connection and plug it directly into the OEM sensor. Next is to route and guide the RaceChip wiring harness away from any hot and moving parts, and then zip tie it in place with the shorter supplied zip ties. We're going to be zip tying to any electrical lines like we are here. We don't want to go too tight to pinch or bend any of the electrical wires, or if we're zip tying to any fluid lines, we don't want to bend or kink any fluid lines. So before we reinstall the engine components, we're going to trim the excess ends off the zip ties to give everything a nice OEM look. Now we'll install the 4 mounting tabs. The really nice thing about our mounting tabs is you can mount it vertically or horizontally with the 2 longer supplied zip ties. If you ever need to remove the RaceChip to revert the car back to stock, you don't actually have to cut the zip ties. Instead, you can press the 4 corners of the locking tabs to keep the zip ties and mounting tabs in place, but remove the RaceChip. Next up is to remove the deactivation plug. Now you're going to want to hang on to the deactivation plug. If you ever need to take the car back to stock or take it in for service, you can remove the RaceChip and place the deactivation plug in the place of the RaceChip. We suggest throwing the deactivation plug in your center console or maybe your glove box. Next step, we'll install the RaceChip in the same spot the deactivation plug just was. It's really important the first time that we install the RaceChip, if you have the GTS, you have no LED lights light up on the screen, or if you have the RS to the S, you have no green LED light up the first time we install the RaceChip. You don't want any power to the device that very first time. Now we'll want to mount the RaceChip someplace away from the hot and moving parts. Generally, a good idea is anywhere near a headlight or the battery or even the fuse box, as that's someplace that the moisture is going to be hard to get to. So for this application, we found a great spot right here, and we're going to mount the RaceChip right here. So for this application in the E-Class, we're going to mount with the 2 longer supplied zip ties horizontally. Go ahead and run these through the mounting tabs. And then we're going to fish the extra lines through the mounting tab of the coolant reservoir right here. And zip tie the RaceChip securely in place. And just like before, if we're going to be zip tying to any fluid or electrical lines, we don't want to mount it too tight. Now with everything securely mounted and the RaceChip installed, the last thing to do is to put the engine components back in place. So we'll start with the air intakes. One of the last few steps here is to reinstall the fresh air intake. Again, there's that locking tab in the back over here, so we'll want to slide that back in first. And then go ahead and click everything in place. Next thing is to reinstall the black plastic locking tabs and screw in the torque screws back in place. And the last step here is to reinstall the plastic engine cover. Start in the default setting of the RaceChip for the first time you test drive the car. If everything works great, you can then move the RaceChip to the next level up. Be aware that the car needs some time to adapt before releasing the full performance upgrade. Now, get out, drive,